He was a warrior, a man of honor and strength, feared across the Mongolian steppes. He was a respected leader, commanding the loyalty of thousands who would fight and die for him. He was captured, bound like a common criminal, not by his enemies on the battlefield, but by his own people, the very men he trusted most. This is the tragic prison story of Jamukha. But why would Jamukha's own trusted generals, men who had fought beside him for years, suddenly turn against their leader? What terrible secret deal was made in the shadows? What price was offered that could break the sacred bonds of loyalty?
Their names were Jamukha and Temujin. Two boys from different clans, different families, different paths.
They were not born brothers. Jamukha came from a respected family of herders, while Temujin's clan. But they chose to become brothers through the sacred Mongolian ritual of Anda.
They called it Anda, a sworn brotherhood, a bond considered sacred and unbreakable in Mongolia. This bond was sacred in Mongolian culture, a promise witnessed by the spirits of earth and sky. From that day forward, they were inseparable. They trained together with wooden swords, each learning to protect the other.
They hunted together in the vast wilderness, learning the land and each other's ways. Where one was weak, they shared food by the fire, under the eternal stars, telling stories and dreams of the future. They told each other their deepest secrets, their fears and hopes, things they could never tell anyone else. They promised to never betray each other, no matter what fate would bring. Their loyalty to each other would be... Nothing could break their bond, or so they believed. Together. But something dark was coming, a force neither boy could see or predict. The winds of change were blowing across Mongolia. Wars, politics, and the hunger for power would soon... Temujin became known as Genghis Khan, the name that would echo through history and strike fear into the hearts of empires from China to Europe. He became the greatest conqueror in human history, a man whose name would be remembered for 1,000 years. His armies would conquer from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, creating the... And Jamukha became a powerful leader too, respected across the steppes. He commanded thousands of the finest warriors, men who respected his strength and feared his wrath. But despite their brotherhood, despite the sacred oath of Anda, they had sworn as boys.
And that difference of vision, that fundamental disagreement about how the world should be, would destroy everything they had built together. Jamukha believed deeply in the old way, the ancient traditions that had governed Mongolian society for countless generations.
In Jamukha's worldview, only people born into noble families, those with noble blood in their veins, these were the rules, carved in stone and written in blood. This was the law that had governed Mongolia for hundreds of years.
For hundreds of years, this cycle had continued unbroken. Noble families passed power to their noble children.
But Genghis Khan believed something completely different, something dangerous that threatened every noble family's power. This idea terrified the nobles and the powerful, because it threatened everything they had.
Genghis Khan believed that anyone with talent, skill, and loyalty could rise to power, regardless of their birth.
In Genghis Khan's vision, A poor shepherd who proved himself in battle could become a general commanding thousands. A slave could become a commander, trusted with the Khan's own army.
Side by side, the difference was clear. Should the incompetent noble's son lead men into battle just because of his birth?
This idea was truly revolutionary, and it spread like wildfire across the
It gave hope to millions of common people who had lived their entire lives believing they could never be anything more than what they were born to be.
But this same idea terrified the nobles and the traditional elite. Every noble family that had held power for...
Because Genghis Khan's idea meant they could lose everything they had. Their wealth, their status, their guaranteed power.
The two brothers who once swore to protect each other now stood on opposite sides of an ideological war.
Jamukha wanted to preserve the old power structure, to keep the traditions of his ancestors alive. Genghis Khan wanted to create an entirely new world, where talent and loyalty mattered more than ancient bloodlines. With such fundamental differences, with two completely opposite visions for Mongolia's future, war became inevitable.
But when two such powerful forces collide, when two brilliant leaders command armies of devoted warriors, they fought many brutal battles across the sacred steppes, brother against brother.
Blood stained the sacred steppe, the eternal grasslands that had nourished generations of Mongolians now soaked with the blood of civil war. At first, Jamukha was winning. His superior numbers and the backing of all the noble families gave him advantage in the early battles.
He had the open support of all the noble families who brought their wealth, their warriors, and their resources to his...
He had wealth from centuries of noble families' accumulated fortunes. He had tradition and the blessings of the ancient spirits.
But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, something began to change. Small crack. Genghis Khan's revolutionary message was spreading like wildfire through whispered conversations and secret. But wait. Common soldiers who had spent their entire lives being told they were worthless because of their birth suddenly heard that they could be general.
They saw a chance for a better life, not just for themselves, but for their children. They imagined a world where, and once they believed, they started to leave Jamukha's army. First in ones and twos, then in dozens, then in hundreds.
Even Jamukha's closest men, generals who had fought beside him for years, began to abandon him. Jamukha stood alone and watched his army disappear, melting away like snow in the spring sun.
Jamukha was losing everything he had fought for. His army, his influence, his vision for Mongolia's future.
But even as defeat became inevitable, even as his world collapsed around him, Jamukha refused to give up or stir. He stood tall despite the defeat, his back straight, his head high. To surrender or beg would... And then came the darkest night of all, when the final betrayal would come not from distant enemies or departing soldiers.
That night, exhausted from battle and the weight of losing his army, Jamukha finally fell into deep sleep inside his tent.
Jamukha trusted his remaining generals completely. These were men who had fought beside him for years, who had stayed when others left. But earlier that day, those same generals had made a terrible plan in secret.
They convinced themselves that if they captured Jamukha and delivered him to Genghis Khan, they would be rewarded with gold, land, and power.
Under cover of darkness, they crept silently into his tent like assassins. These men he had trusted. Jamukha woke to rough hands grabbing him, yanking him up from sleep. For a confused moment, he thought enemies had...
His own men were tying his hands, binding him like a criminal. These generals who had pledged loyalty to him, who he had elevated and trusted.
The great warrior Jamukha, who had commanded thousands and never bowed to any man, was now on his knees. The generals dragged their bound leader out of his own tent, past his own banner that still flew overhead.
They took him on the long journey to Genghis Khan's camp. For hours, they rode across the steppe that had once been his to command.
The three generals rode with eager anticipation, already imagining the gold and honors that Genghis Khan would.
They thought they would be heroes, celebrated for bringing the war to an end. They imagined Genghis Khan would see them as clever and loyal. As they approached Genghis Khan's camp, dark clouds gathered overhead, as if the sky itself was preparing.
Jamukha was thrown into a crude wooden cage like a common criminal, not treated with the respect due a great warrior. The door slammed shut.
He sat in darkness and silence, alone with only his thoughts and memories. The great leader who had commanded thousands now had no one. The great leader was now completely alone, reduced to a prisoner in a cage.
How did it feel to be betrayed by the men he had trusted? To lose everything he had fought for? To sit in a cage?
Then, footsteps approached through the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, backlit by torches carried by guards behind him. It was Genghis Khan, the boy named Temujin, who had once been Jamukha's sworn brother. Now
The two brothers faced each other after years of war, separated now not just by wooden bars, but one man stood as emperor, dressed in gold and glory, master of the largest army ever assembled, his word law across Mongolia.
For a long moment, neither man spoke. The silence between them held 1,000 memories, 100 battles, years. The silence held 1,000 memories. In that moment, both men remembered the boys they had been. What would Genghis Khan do? Would he execute his former brother as an enemy? Would he show mercy for their old bond? Or was there another path? Finally, Genghis Khan spoke first, his voice carrying both authority and unexpected emotion. "Join me, brother," Genghis Khan said. The offer was real, the emotion genuine. Despite the...
Fight by my side again. Imagine what we could accomplish together. The Anda brothers.
I forgive you completely. All the battles, all the opposition, all the years of fighting, I forgive all of it. We can be Anda again. The sacred bond we swore as children. The brotherhood that...
The Empire can be ours together, not mine alone, but ours. Share the throne with me as brothers. Rule by my side as equals.
All is forgiven, all is forgotten. Take my hand, stand up, walk out of this cage as my brother and my equal.
It was everything Jamukha could want. Freedom, power, brotherhood restored, empire shared.
But Jamukha slowly raised his eyes from that offered hand to look directly into his former brother's face.
And Jamukha said something that shocked even Genghis Khan. Something that no prisoner has said for.
I cannot serve under anyone. Not even you, brother. Not even as equals.
I was born to lead, not to follow. This is who I am, in my bones and blood.
If I cannot rule as I was meant to, if I cannot live as the man I am, then I choose death.
Genghis Khan was truly stunned. He had not expected this absolute, immovable refusal.
Kill me with honor. If I am to die, and I accept that I must, then let me die in the way of my people, in the honorable way.
Let me die as a warrior, with the respect due my rank and my blood. That is my final wish, not mercy, not life, not power.
Genghis Khan's heart was breaking. A single tear rolled down the face of the man who had conquered armies and toppled empires. But he respected his brother's choice. Because Genghis Khan understood the warrior code that drove Jamukha. But before the end came, before his fate was sealed, Jamukha leaned forward with one more thing to say. His voice changed, became urgent.
Those men who brought me to you, Jamukha said, his eyes hardening as he thought of them. The three... They betrayed their own leader while he slept, sold me out for imagined gold. These men cannot be trusted, not by me and certainly not by you.